Chapter 2. The Cala Vista Motel sat on the corner of Coast Boulevard and Meadow Lane. It was a small motel, the first of 3 motels in a row. The Topaz Inn and the Lagoon Motel were right next door and bigger, but I immediately decided I liked our little motel the best. With its creamy walls and red doors, it looked warm and inviting. I looked up at the design and read the words, "Low rates, cable TV, Disneyland, just 5 miles away." Excitedly, I asked my parents if that meant we could visit and go on all the rides. "We probably could," my mom said. I smiled, savoring the moment. Our lives were about to change. We were going to become Disneyland-going people. As if things couldn't get any better, the Cala Vista had a pool. It was right out in front. The water sparkled under the golden sun. I closed my eyes and pictured myself doing cannonballs in the water all summer long. This was going to be amazing. Just behind the pool was the front office. I'd asked my parents in the car whether I could help out at the front desk. My dad had chuckled and said, "We'll see." Mr. Yao was waiting for us in the front office. He buzzed us in and lifted the divider so we could all get behind the front desk. The front desk was a long wooden desk that stretched almost the entire width of the room. Just behind the front office were the manager's quarters, where Mr. Yao led us. There was a living room with a bed in it. He pointed to the bed. "You guys sleep there," he said to my parents, "so you can hear the customers in the middle of the night." "Customers come in the middle of the night?" my dad asked. Mr. Yao nodded. "Of course, it's a motel." "But won't that wake them up?" I asked. Mr. Yao rolled his eyes. "That's the point," he said. Next, he led us over to a small bedroom, just right off the living room and the kitchen. "The girl can sleep here," Mr. Yao said. For some reason, he still kept calling me the girl, even though I had already told him my name several times. I put myself down in the small bedroom, then joined my parents and Mr. Yao in the front office. Mr. Yao was explaining the buzzer. "One wrong buzz and it's all over," he said. "See that glass?" He pointed to the thick glass enclosing the front office. "That's bulletproof. You see a bad guy come up, you don't need to worry. They can't hurt you. But if you press this buzzer," he put his fingers on the buzzer just under the front desk, and a loud buzz roared. "That door right there gets unlocked," Mr. Yao said. "And then what?" I asked him. "Then he's inside," Mr. Yao said. I looked around to see if there were any other magical buttons or bulletproof glass inside the office. There weren't. I asked Mr. Yao how we could tell if someone was a bad guy. "Based on how they look, of course," he said, which made me wonder because it's not like bad people walk around with a sticker on their head saying I'm bad. "The bottom line is, don't let bad guys in," Mr. Yao warned. His pupils expanded as he said the word bad. Mr. Yao took my parents out back to show them the laundry room and cleaning supplies. I stayed in the front office. I climbed up on top of the front desk stool. Gently, I reached down and touched the buzzer with my fingers. It was greasy, like it had been pressed hundreds of times. Slowly, I pressed it and heard a zap. I pressed it again. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Power coursed through my fingertips. I closed my eyes and pictured myself checking in customers. "Why, yes, Mr. Connolly, I'd be glad to show you to your room. Right this way," I'd say. "Certainly I can help you with your luggage. It would be my pleasure." So deep was I in my fake customer relations that I didn't hear it when a real customer walked up and tapped on the front office glass. I looked up to see a thin African-American man, about 50 or so years old, smiling and waving. He motioned with his fingers to buzz me in. "Oh, right," I said, and I pressed on the buzzer. Buzz. He opened the door and walked in. "Just saw Mr. Yao in the lot. You must be the new managers," he said. He extended his hand across the front desk. "Name's Hank." I smiled and took his hand and shook it. "I'm Mia. Nice to meet you." He tilted his head to one side. "How old are you, Mia?" "I'm 10, I told him. "Say, aren't you a little bit young to be running this place?" he teased me. I laughed. I liked Hank immediately. "I'm helping my parents," I told him. "What about you? Do you live here?" "Sure do," he said, and pointed to one of the rooms. "That's me right there, number 12. Hank informed me that he wasn't a regular customer. the kind who stays just a day or two. He was a weekly. A weekly is someone who pays by the week. There were 5 of them at the Cala Vista. They were Mrs. Q, Mr. T, Hank, Billy Bob, and Fred. You'll meet them, he said. They're all nice people. I smiled. Do you guys like living here, I asked. Oh, yeah, he said. Well, except for Mr. Yao. Everyone hates Mr. Yao. Really? I asked him. He seems all right. Intense, but all right. Hank snorted. Trust me, he's anything but all right. Before I could ask Hank what he meant by that, the back door creaked open and my parents and Mr. Yao came back in. When I turned around, Hank was gone. Chapter 3. Sign here on the dotted line, Mr. Yao said to my parents, presenting them with an enormous employment contract 6 pages long. My parents beamed as they proudly signed their names. Mr. Yao took the signed employment contract and stuffed it into his bag. Thank you so much, Mr. Yao, for giving us this opportunity, my father said. You don't know how much this means to us. He got choked up as he said the words. We promise we'll take good care of your motel, my mom added. We won't let you down. Mr. Yao nodded and held up the manager's keys to the motel. As my parents reached for the keys, he held them just out of reach. Everything that happens in this motel is your responsibility. You understand? He asked. Something breaks, you have to pay for it. My parents nodded. Under no circumstances are you ever to leave the motel unattended, ever. One of you must always stay behind. Again, my parents nodded eagerly, even though I was thinking, wait, what? I can't go out with both my parents at the same time? But what about Disneyland? But it was condition number 3 that really made my jaw drop. Mr. Yao turned to me. You can't use the pool, kid, he said. Why not, I asked. If you use the pool, then all the customers will want to use the pool. So think of all the water and the towels they'll be wasting, he said. It's not good for the environment. I frowned at him. Somehow I doubted this was about the environment. She understands you won't use the pool, will you, Mia? My mother shook her head at me. I glanced at my mom and the desperation in her eyes. Okay, I said. Good, Mr. Yao grinned, satisfied. He tossed my parents the keys. That night, the sweet smell of jasmine tea filled the front office. My parents only ever got the jasmine tea out for special occasions. We had packed a small tin of it before we left China, and every time something good happened, my mom would take out a few leaves and make some tea. I guess not a lot of good things had happened because there was still quite a lot left. But all that was about to change. Tonight, my parents poured generously from the tin. The calming aroma brought me back to my grandmother's house. All of us crowded around the table. At these big family dinners, my cousin Shen and I would always giggle and interrupt each other as we talked. I felt an ache in my tummy, razor sharp, at the thought of Shen. I still remember the day I left. I could see Shen's face pressed up against the glass by the security gate at the airport, blinking furiously like he was trying hard not to cry. I was too. On the plane ride over, they gave us little packets of butter for our bread. Butter was very expensive in China, so I asked for extras and put them in my pocket. I saved them for Shen for months in the fridge until it finally sank in that we weren't going back. So I ate them. My mother's voice jerked me back to reality. Hey, Mia, look here, look at me, she said, smiling. Huh? I asked. I looked up to see my mother crouching in front of the front desk, holding her hands up like she was going to take a picture. It's this thing she does. My mom says it's important to take pictures of the nice moments in life, even if it's just in your head. As my mom pressed down on her pretend camera, my dad and I sat up straight and gave her our best smiles. Eggplant, she said in Chinese, and I giggled because even though that's what people in China said whenever someone took pictures, it was funny hearing it in America. As my parents unpacked, I slipped out the back to find Hank. I brought him a cup of jasmine tea. Now that we were making $150 a day, surely we could afford to buy some more. I seen a Chinese supermarket on the way over here. Hank's room was in the back, beside the laundry room. There was a pot of cherry tomato plants in front of his room. I knocked on the door. Hank answered on the first knock. His eyebrows shot up when he saw the tea. That's for me? He exclaimed. I smiled and handed it to him. It's from China, I told him. Get out of here. The guy next door opened his door to see what was going on. He was a white guy about the same age as Hank. He wore a Hawaiian shirt and he had a small tattoo of a sailboat on his arm. The smell of popcorn drifted from his room. Billy Bob, Hank said. Meet Mia. She's the new manager. And look, she brought me some tea from China. Good to meet you, Mia, Billy Bob said, extending a hand. I shook it. Pleasure's all mine, I said. Billy Bob smiled. Say, you're a lot nicer than the old manager. The last manager treated us like second-class citizens, Hank added. Really? I asked. Hank nodded carefully. He lifted the cup to his lips and took a sip. Oh, this is the good stuff. Hank turned to Billy Bob. You've got to try this. More doors opened, and soon all the weeklies were outside talking and sipping the tea under the glowing crescent. Like Billy Bob, they were white too. Mrs. Q had long wavy hair that ran all the way down her back. Fred had a big belly that shook when he laughed, and Mrs. T had glittery cat-eyed reading glasses, which she wore on top of her nose. Hank was right. They were all very nice. The weeklies asked if I wanted to join them for a game of Monopoly, but it was getting late and I needed to help my parents pack. I bid them all good night and was about to go back to the manager's quarters when I suddenly remembered. Hey, Hank, what do you mean by what you said earlier about Mr. Yao? I asked. That he was anything but all right? Hank's jaw locked. You'll find out soon, kid, Hank said. The man has coal for a heart. Chapter 4. Hank's words thrashed around inside me. Mr. Yao was strict, sure, maybe even a little dramatic, but coal for a heart? Hank couldn't possibly be right. This was the man who trusted us with his motel, was letting us live here for free, and was paying us $150 a day. The first thing the next day, I intended on setting Hank straight. But when morning came, my mother had other plans. Let's go see your new school today, she announced. I groaned. Another grade, another year as the new girl. When you've moved as much as I have, checking out schools is like checking out shoe polish. So far, I'd gone to 4 different schools for 5 different grades. Dale Elementary School was about 5 blocks east from the motel and a lot bigger than my old school. It was late August, so classes didn't start for a couple of days. As my mom and I walked across the big, empty parking lot, I wondered what kind of kids went there. Nice kids, I hope. We pushed open the door to the office, and the receptionist, a blonde lady with big curls that bounced as she moved her head, looked very surprised to see us. Can I help you? She asked. Hi, I want to sign my daughter up for school. We just moved here, my mom said. The reception looked me up and down. I wriggled in my tattered pants and big old t-shirt from Goodwill. I see, she said. She pushed a button on her desk phone and said, Principal Evans, we have a new student here to see you. Principal Evans wore a blazer even though it was 90 degrees outside. She looked like what my mother calls a powerful white lady. She insisted on taking us on a tour of the school, even though my mom said we didn't need a tour. I could tell she was anxious to get back to the motel. It'll only take 10 minutes, Principal Evans said, leading us toward the gymnasium in her clickety-clack black pumps. So, Mia, tell me about yourself. I opened up my mouth, but before I could say anything, my mom blurted out, She just moved here from China. Oh, why does she always have to tell people that? It wasn't even true. We'd been here for 2 years. Of course, as soon as my mother said those words, Principal Evans started talking to me like I was a turkey. Really? Wow! How do you like this country? She asked. I really like it, I quickly answered. Principal Evans put her hand to her chest and exhaled in relief. You know English? Oh, that's great. I have to admit, we don't get too many Chinese kids here. There's only one other Chinese kid in 5th grade. She smiled at me and added, I'm sure he'll be thrilled you're here. On the way home, my mom and I played our usual game, looking at big American houses and trying to figure out who lived inside. A family with 2 girls, my mom said, pointing to the pink curtains upstairs. And a cat, I said. There was a little door in the front door. I turned to my mom. Hey, why'd you have to tell the principal I just got here from China? So she'd cut you some slack. I stopped peering into the houses and peered into my mom. What do you mean? You heard what she said. There are only 2 Chinese kids in your grade. So? So it probably means most of the other kids are white. So? So they'll be way better than you in English, my mom said matter-of-factly. I looked at the ground. Not necessarily, I said. I might not speak native English like Jason, but my English was a lot better than when I first came, I think. Plus, I liked English. I liked how you could say a train of thought or a blanket of snow, which you couldn't in Chinese. But it didn't matter how much I liked English. My mom had already decided. Necessarily, she said. Chapter 5. We were surprised to find the maid cart right where we left it when we got back. It had not been moved an inch. In the time that we were gone, my dad had only managed to clean 2 rooms. I don't know how I'm going to get through all these rooms, he said, wiping his sweaty brow with another hand on his back. I'll help you, I offered, rolling up my sleeves. In China, I sometimes help my grandmother scrub her kitchen floor. No, my mom said, I don't want you near that stuff. She pointed at the maid cart filled with various colorful bottles of cleaning solutions. Then I'll man the front desk, I said. I'll call you if I need anything. I ran out of the room and down the stairs before she could say no. I've got this, I told myself on the way over to the front desk. This was not going to be like the restaurant. This time, I was not going to fail. All I had to do was hand out keys and take the cash. How hard could that be? I got into position, climbing onto the front desk stool and crossing my hands on the desk. It did not take long before customers started coming. Unfortunately, when they saw me, the first thing they did was ask to speak to the manager. So then I had to up and get my mom. Up and down the stairs I ran. Every time she had to stop what she was doing to run down the stairs with me and into the front office, just to hand the customer the key and take the money. By the 5th time, I thought, enough. I made a little sign and put it in front of the desk. It read, Mia Tang, manager. The next time a customer came in and asked to see the manager, I pointed to the sign, and I stared really hard at him. In science class at my last school, I learned that if you want a mammal to do something, you should stare at it. That's because mammals are social creatures and we're really into hierarchy. At the top, you have your alpha, the leader, and then your betas and omegas. The difference between an alpha and a beta is the alpha wins every staring contest. So I stared and stared until my eyes went blurry, and I was starting to see double, and even then I refused to blink. Finally, the customer broke down and said, Okay, fine. I just need a room for the night. Yes, it worked. That'll be $20 plus tax, I told him. I watched as he dug into his pocket, pulled out a 20 and a 5, and slid the bills across the desk. I gave him back his chain and his key. The whole time, I couldn't believe it was really happening. I was just a kid, and I had asked an adult to hand me money, and he actually did it. I repeated my strategy with everyone else who walked through the door that day. Point, stare, point, stare. Eventually, I didn't even need to stare. People just went ahead and gave me the money. I was so happy. I hopped off the stool, opened up the vending machine, and treated myself to a cream soda. I got one for Hank too and went to find him. Unfortunately, he wasn't home. Fred, one of the other weeklies, said he was working and he wouldn't be home until late. When I got back to the front desk, the phone was ringing. The Calavista had an old-fashioned orange phone with 10 more buttons than a usual one. I didn't know what the extra buttons did, and for a second I fantasized that if we pushed the wrong button, the motel would start flying. Hello? I asked, picking up the receiver. Is this the front desk? A voice asked. I looked at the glowing light and saw that the call was coming from room 6, which I had just rented to Mr. Stein. I cleared my voice. Mr. Stein, how can I help you? I asked, putting on my best customer service voice. I need a wake-up call tomorrow morning at 5 a.m., Mr. Stein said. Wake-up call, 5 a.m., I repeated. You got it. Don't forget. I have to leave then for a very important meeting. I promised I wouldn't and hung up. For the next half an hour, I studied the complicated phone system. There was a manual in the drawer, but it was one of those manuals that was impossible to read. It was like the manual they wrote for the walkie-talkies my mom used to make at the factory in China. Her walkie-talkies were great, But when they were shipped to America, nobody could figure out how they worked because the manuals were full of typos and mistakes. I chuckled and wondered if the Calavista phone system was also made in China, like me. It made me feel strangely close to it. "All right, old friend," I said to the phone system, "let's do this." I punched in the code for the wake-up call and entered in the room number and time. To my amazement, the phone system made a beep. It worked. Pride swelled inside me as I drifted to sleep that night. It was a glorious first day. I'd rented out 12 rooms, 7 of which I'd done all by myself. Not only that, I'd gotten the phone system to work. I didn't need to worry about getting up early to wake up Mr. Stein, and I could sleep easy knowing the awesome phone system would do it for me. Then the morning came.